This lecture, Christ's Lesson of Charity, is from the Banner of Light newspaper, Boston, dated May 16, 1863. A lecture by Mrs. Cora L.V. Hatch before the Lyceum Society of Spiritualists in Lyceum Hall, Boston, Sunday, May 3, 1863. Our Father, Infinite Spirit, whose name we pronounce and whose light we feel, whose being above all beings pervades and beautifies the universe, light of our sun and motor of every star, whose world is the universe, whose soul is infinite mind, Spirit of all power, we praise Thee. We praise Thee with glad thanksgiving for life. Praise Thee for the earth, teeming with beauty and with perfection. Praise Thee for worlds unnumbered, which only reflect the image of Thine intelligence. Praise Thee for every form of being and of power, for the universe, alive with intelligence and freedom. But more than for worlds or systems of worlds do we praise Thee for the consciousness of the human soul, which is a world in itself, and for the aspirations of the living spirit, boundless as Thine own being, while its eternal life is coeval with Thee. We praise Thee more for the thoughts of the immortal spirit, its strength and power, its light and love, its consciousness of immortal being, than for the splendors of all worlds, or the glories of boundless suns. For though worlds may change their form and pass away, though suns may be blotted out, the thoughts of the living spirit are undying and forever before Thee, in eternal life, attain to more perfect truth, and to a higher conception of Thy being. Therefore do we praise Thee, and we bring our offerings of devotion, not to ask for more blessings, but only that we may rightly value those already bestowed, not to ask for personal favors, but that each individual may appreciate those blessings which are spread everywhere around. Thy nature is infinite, and we cannot teach Thee what to give us, or ask Thee to bestow Thy love and mercy and charity upon us. As the sunshine lighteth all the earth, and beams upon all who will receive it, so does Thy love permeate every heart, and those who will seek may drink in its sunshine. Thou bestowest all honors. We bless Thee for them, and we praise Thee for all of light and all of consciousness which we possess, and only ask that we may know more and more of those blessings given, attain to higher and yet higher steeps of knowledge and wisdom, and grasp those treasures of perpetual truth which rest with Thee and with the living soul. And to Thy name shall be all our praises, not the mouth utterances of our lips, but the prayers of our souls, which like the incense of flowers or the morning song of birds go forth in glad thanksgiving. We praise Thee not alone in words, for these are but vibrations which die away upon the atmosphere, but the pulsations of our hearts, our thoughts and deeds, our perpetual prayers or blasphemies unto Thee. May those of Thy children here present praise Thee in deeds and words of holy kindness, by ministering with the hand of charity to those who are in sorrow and suffering. May they praise Thee by remembering that life is constant, perpetual, undying, and that Thou livest above all forms of strife and death, forevermore. Amen. And Jesus said, Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. He said, Neither do I condemn thee. Go, and sin no more. And when they murmured, he said, Let him that is without sin cast the first stone. And he stooped down and wrote on the ground. There is a pretty tradition in the Romish Church that when Jesus had administered this rebuke to his followers, who were murmuring because he did not condemn Magdalene, he traced in the sand opposite each person his own particular sin, and that this was the cause of their silence. Whether that be true or not, the rebuke is one which until eternity will remain sacred, one which, in every age and clime, though no man stands to write the deeds of every soul upon the sand, may well be observed, and the lesson which it should teach to every soul is not a love of or license to sin, but that stern yet powerful love of charity which belongs to Jesus of Nazareth. Among all his teachings, whether in speech or miracle, Nothing in our conception is more beautiful than this. Imagine his followers gathered around him, and among that number one whom they would have condemned and despised. She too, seeking instruction and blessing, knelt at his feet. And when he had dismissed her with a charitable saying at which his followers murmured, behold him with the power of his sacred truth beaming from his face, reading every man's soul, knowing each man's sin, and calling upon the one that was without sin to cast the first stone. We see in the present day, and indeed in every age of the world, this same propensity exhibited. We see very good people who, imagining they are without sin, are quite willing to cast the first stone against their brother or sister. We see everywhere exemplified this conscious self-righteousness, the same propensity of condemnation, the same readiness to despise those whom others despise, and never, except in the repetition of this saying, which is often quoted, do we see, practically, those who are willing to give the rebuke. It is very easy to quote the language which we have just uttered, and to pronounce it beautiful, charitable, fine. Very easy in Christian churches and in Christian society and in all manner of society to say that it is high and ennobling. Very easy to pronounce the lesson of charity taught by Jesus and elucidated by Paul as the highest of the Christian virtues. Very easy in walking about in ordinary life to say that charity is the greatest Christian virtue. But it is a harder cross than any Christian, or any person not a Christian, is willing to bear, to exemplify in constant action that ennobling, overpowering feeling of charity, or virtually to express these words in daily life. The charity which we feel in poetry and song, in sermons and essays, is vastly different from the charity which walks in the street, which perceives the wanderer by the wayside, which takes the outcast by the hand, which rebukes the murmuring, thronging crowd. Vastly different is the charity which may be breathed in the evening hymn and prayer, around the fireside, which may be poured forth from every rostrum and pulpit, which may be found in every newspaper and magazine, which is published in every work in Christendom, from that which is scarcely written on the tablets of any human heart, much less on the tablets of any human life. Who among you would be willing thus to speak, were Magdalene among you tonight? Who among you would take her by the hand and not condemn her? And who among you that are her sisters would not walk proudly by, and not even murmur in your souls the sentence which we have quoted? And yet we do not, would not, condemn you. We only illustrate the fact that the influence of the teachings of this man Jesus, the true pillar of the Christian world, is quite lost with reference to the practice of that world. For this there is a cause, undoubtedly, and that cause must be removed before one tithe or particle of his utterances can be understood, before the smallest portion of his charity can be known. Charity does not mean to give countenance to crime, to say, well, this is murder, this is theft, but the person could not help it. It is all right. It does not mean simply to say, there is a fatality, and it is necessary for everyone to fulfill his destiny, as some modern philosophers would have you believe. Charity does not imply giving countenance to vice, that it may walk boldly forth in the street, robed in purple. But it means that, with all its preaching, talking, frowning, contumely, every human soul is also erring. It means that among all who judge, there is no person who may not also be judged. It means, what in another part of the Bible is very clearly expressed, that no man doeth good. Therefore, no one should judge his brother. It means that in the highest and loftiest minds which the world has produced, those whose lives are examples of virtue, who in every department of life may have illustrated the most exalted virtues, there is the same capability of error which, under different circumstances, might have produced a murderer, a thief, or a traitor. It means that those surrounded by virtuous influences, who have never wandered from the family circle, from the sacred influence of the love of those who are near and dear to them, are not so much different in their organization, in their tendencies, or in their proclivities, that they are incapable of sin. It means that human nature is very similar all over the world, that under circumstances of temptation, man will commit crime, and therefore should not judge his fellow. The wisest and most penetrating prayer which Jesus ever uttered was this: "Lead us not into temptation." For there exists no mind so lofty, so far removed above all liability to temptation, that it may not fail. And there exists no mind so low or so degraded that may not, under the influence of love and kindness, be redeemed. Humanity makes such superficial distinctions. There is so much of this disposition to condemn the individual. There is so much of this tendency to believe that it is impossible for the I to sin while the you is always wrong. So much of this feeling which justifies in itself what it condemns in others. So much of this discrimination between gilded vice and vice that is not gilded, that according to the modern standard of virtue, we should judge that the unfortunate boy who happens to be detected in pilfering a loaf of bread, and the proud millionaire who has for a long period of years practiced a system of robbery upon everyone with whom he came in contact, were widely different. The boy is condemned to the workhouse provided for such sinners, while the man enters the Christian church and worships at the shrine of Jesus. The thief who steals millions, while the heart's blood of the nation is flowing and ebbing away, and may have the crime of treason added to that of theft, is permitted to walk in Christian streets and regarded as an example of Christian virtue, while the poor, unfortunate desperado, who chances to be detected in following his vocation, which has become his vocation from we cannot tell what stern necessities, is confined for life in the penitentiary or jailhouse. Not that the Church by any means approves. Not that the rich sinner's crime is specifically and definitely known. He has been too shrewd. His intelligence is too great to permit of his being detected in an individual act of crime. But then it is well known and understood that by some dishonest means, at the expense of the nation or of the poor, he has obtained the wealth which gives him the entrée to any sacred edifice. Thus we walk the streets, and thus among you we perceive these conditions of charity, and we find that charity, when clothed in such garb, loses its essential elements of virtue, that it is a charity of form and not of reality. We can see perhaps that those who, in high places, are guilty of the greatest crimes by the very enormity of their offenses and the loftiness of their position, command something of human respect. But it is the petty pilferer, the petty thief, the petty murderer who must be condemned, while those who slay and steal by thousands are regarded as examples of virtue. This does not alone apply to these extremes, but in some degree every individual may apply it. We may not, as individuals, possess the distinctive virtue of which we see the absence in another. As individuals we may not be thieves, in the usual acceptation of the term, but there is no person who does not possess the elements of a thief. Let us see. There are thieves who rob openly, publicly, highway robbers who stop a man upon the highway or upon the street and demand that which they think he possesses, money. There are others who, instead of openly avowing their vocation, adopt some kind of profession for the same purpose, but in a different way, and by every sort of device, every conceivable system of treachery, rob men even more effectually than if they walked up to them in the streets and took their money. There are others who, in the name of philanthropy and charity, rob humanity and the world by constantly pilfering from them, and these are regarded as public benefactors. There are others who, in their profession or in their business, rob gradually, year by year, until, because of their accumulation of vast wealth, no matter how many hearts have been broken, they are regarded as patterns and examples. These are only a few of the many kinds of robbery. There are other kinds of theft than these. Thieving does not always apply to money. There are those who rob people of their time, which is far more valuable than money, who are constantly pilfering moments that are invaluable, stepping in upon private sanctuaries where they are intruders, where they are bores, always wandering about, having nothing to do in particular but to rob people of their time. Now there are persons to whom time, in every moment of time, is far more valuable in its production of thoughts and aspirations, which move the world, than countless thousands of wealth, and by robbing them of that time, you commit a greater crime, perhaps against the world, than by taking a few dollars from their pockets. Then there are thieves who are constantly going round in society, robbing people of their reputations. These thieves are the worst of all. They are found in all conceivable places, in sly corners and nooks, prying into secrets, revealing all occupations. Nothing so sacred that it does not come beneath their basilisk eyes. Nothing so secret that they do not find it out. These are the great thieves of society. These are those who rob the world of half its virtue. And these are those who above all others should receive condemnation. It is impossible to fix any theft upon any particular individual. It is impossible to find them, to know where they are, what their place, position, circumstances may be. But they rob people of that which is more valuable than time or money either, the reputation. Many a poor man has been driven from respectability, from circumstances and conditions of affluence, to want and low, groveling dependency, by these thieves of reputation called slanderers. Many have been driven to poverty and crime by these same thieves. Many men have been driven to the lowest depths of degradation, depravity, and drunkenness, and many a young, blushing maiden has been deprived of her good name by these same thieves. This, in our conception, is the greatest theft of all. Not only a robbery, but almost a murder. For killing a good name and reputation is worse than taking physical life away, for it is dooming the individual to a living death, which time cannot alter, and which only the grave, and not always that, can cover up. These thieves never imagine that they are such, and if accused of the crime would deny it. They never believe that they possess any sins, but are always discovering sins in others, a flaw in look, or in deed, or in word, a something not spoken aright, or not thought aright, for they have always the power of penetrating your thoughts, and but for their occupation might be regarded as clairvoyant. But such is not the case. They only imagine that they discover in others what we, perhaps uncharitably, imagine that they possess themselves. These are in some degree prevalent in all societies. They form not the general rule, but the exceptions, and yet every individual may add, in some degree, to this kind of theft. We would advise these thieves of time and thieves of reputation to be very careful that they apply something of this which I have quoted about throwing the first stone. Then there is another class of murderers, in every sense of the word, who, if not absolutely taking life, are by violence depriving it of its every essential property, and therefore making it almost unendurable. These are those who crush the poor. These are those who bind the chains of darkness round the spirit instead of releasing it. These are those who condemn the outcasts and kill them, or condemn them to death by refusing to aid them to rise. And this is worse than actual death, for it is that which preys upon the spirit, with its constant insidious poison lurking there night and day. For no refreshing sleep can destroy its influence. No morning sun can light the spirit with hope and joy, but it preys forever until it eats the soul away. These, the murderers of society, may surely take something of this rebuke to themselves. Then there are those who murder by a constant oppression of the poor, of those who toil day and night in the effort to get their bread, and sometimes, perhaps, seek to drown their trouble in the intoxicating cup. The murderers of society do not consider this, but still more closely bind the chains and drag them down. There are those walking in high places, whom men regard with fellowship and countenance, the loftiest among you, sitting upon thrones, almost in your midst, who are the thieves and murderers of society, to whom we might say, "Let him that is without sin cast the first stone." There are those, and it is inherent in almost every human soul, who in some manner or form possess these crimes, this love of vice, this constant lurking sinfulness, and it is useless to seek to hide it by professing the greatest virtue. It cannot exist. Humanity, when assailed by temptation in different directions, will almost assuredly err, and the wisest judgment, the loftiest mind, only hopes to escape, perhaps, from the darkest crimes, never arrogates to itself perfection. And we must learn this lesson, that it is not by condemning, but by teaching, that vice and sin are to be removed. We visit a prison, and behold the captive in a dungeon there. Perhaps he has dragged out weary months of confinement with scarcely a ray of light, and only food enough to keep his mortal life in his body. And yet, if we commence with denunciations, and in harsh terms express our condemnation, he turns away in stolid indifference and says, "I know it. I know that I am bad, but I cannot help it." But visit him, and ask him if he remembers his childhood, if he remembers his mother's voice and her gentle touch, if he remembers when he sat upon her knee and first learned to lisp the name Our Father. And soon the lines upon his face begin to relax, the hands to tremble, the eye to grow moist with the teardrops of recollection, and the proud man, the criminal, is humble. If a mother's love is so potent, even in the remembrance, what power then is there in human love to make the most stolid and indifferent mind grow brighter beneath its touch? Surely no word of condemnation could cause him to shed tears, no harsh rebuke cause him to turn to penitence. This is the power in a mother's love, because it never condemns. We often hear a father's voice in harshness turning away his son or daughter from the parental roof because of some offense, but we have yet to learn of the mother's heart which has condemned her child. Through all the paths of sin, to the prison cell and to the gallows, her heart and eyes follow her child, and triumph even over death and sin. How all-potent, all-powerful then must be that infinite love which, when remembered, would call the darkest mind from its error and its sin. Let us always remember that the greatest minds who grace the universe must always be expected to have, perhaps, the greatest vices. The world has produced but very few minds who were equally great in every department, and the exceptions seem to confirm the rule that great minds in any given direction almost always lack in other directions. Our greatest statesmen are often devoid of the commonest elements of morality and justice. Our greatest poets have often, from the very intensity of their greatness, been deprived of moral stamina in other directions. And our greatest philosophers and men of science have been lacking in some other essential departments of life. An equilibrium so essentially pervades all nature and humanity, also that in these exceptions and excesses we must expect a corresponding lack, or what we term a corresponding sin. There are some minds towering high above all others who seem to possess every element of virtue and every conscious greatness, but these are rare, and are likely specially brilliant lights, or stars of the first magnitude, among the myriads of lesser stars in the great galaxies of human mind. So every mind possesses its leading vice and leading virtue. We expect and must expect this of humanity, and no man or woman can say, "Thou art sinful, and I am holy. You are bad, and I am good," or place any man under the circumstances in which the vagrant, the outcast, and the thief are placed.